Toastmaster, ladies and gentlemen. The goal of my speech tonight is to convince you that addiction is a disease of the brain and not a failure of willpower. So we've all known people who, after they've had a few drinks, keep on going and they eventually do things that they regret. When this pattern repeats for a long period of time, to the detriment of other aspects of their lives, it is called alcoholism or addiction, depending on the substance. Addiction is considered by many people to be a failure of willpower, saying things such as, why can't they just stop? I will use our time together tonight to tell you the reasons why many scientists and clinicians who are treating addiction as a brain disease, rather than a failure of morality or a failure of willpower. So the main reason that I believe that addiction is a brain disease is that the circuitry in the brain is irreversibly changed during the time leading up to the addiction taking hold. It might help to illustrate this point by thinking of the brain in two parts. So we really have the reptilian brain versus the new brain. So the reptilian brain is the older evolutionary part of the brain that has been around since lizards evolved, and it was developed in order to motivate animals to find food, mating partners, water, etc. Other rewards, basically. So over time, as more complex social and motivational strategies for hunting, etc. were needed, a complex layer called the cortex developed around this older reptilian brain. And so this was developed to process sensory information and to help make more complex social decisions. So when alcohol and drugs are used over a long period of time, the older natural reward circuitry, the reptilian brain, tends to be hijacked by the alcohol and the drugs. And that works on many of the same pathways as these natural reward pathways do in that older portion of the brain. Unfortunately, the frontal cortex, the part of the brain that does most of the conscious decision making associated with your day-to-day decisions, is suppressed at the same time. So you have this bad situation where this older portion is basically being taken over by the drugs and the alcohol, and then the portion that you're trying to normally use to make your decisions is actually being suppressed by the drugs and the alcohol. So this is one of the reasons that people can black out when they're drinking and still walk around and do things that they later regret. You can think of it as the older reptilian brain walking around without its frontal cortex. Over time, the reptilian brain is making decisions about what to do without the newer counterpart weighing in on these decision-making abilities. So the reward circuitry itself has also changed so that more and more of the rewarding substance is needed in order to achieve the same effects. And this leads to the escalation of the addiction as well. The other problem with this is that it leads to a loss of the rewards for natural rewards because it's using the same circuitry. And so you end up losing the motivation for things like sex and food because you're mostly motivated for the drug of choice at that point. So these circuits, which normally work with the rest of the brain for natural behavior, now dominate normal thought. So another good example of this outside of addiction is obsessive compulsive disorder. So people with obsessive compulsive disorder, particularly of the kind where they believe they have germs on their hands, for example, they will go and they will wash their hands many, many times a day to the point where they have raw hands and they're bleeding, things like this. So they know that this is not logically correct. They know that they don't have germs on their hands. If you tell them that, they will tell you this. But still they go on and they do it over and over again. So the circuitry that moderates that actual behavior is the same circuitry that moderates addiction. And so we know this because if you stimulate with deep brain stimulation, which is a treatment for obsessive compulsive disorder, in that same circuitry that deals with addiction, you can actually cure 50% of the OCD patients that way. So this suggests that there really is circuitry underneath this that we can eventually control. Unfortunately, there is no current treatment for these changed circuits in addiction, like it is for OCD. And the trigger of using drugs or alcohol, again, can lead to the same patterns of behavior over and over again, even after periods of abstinence. So this is one of the reasons that you will find addicts and alcoholics in recovery will choose abstinence even after periods away from those substances. So my final point about this is that there is a genetic predisposition to this disease. And it's an indication that there is a biological basis for this as well. So a history of drug or alcoholism in the family can make it more likely that one will have the same predisposition when drugs or alcohol are used too frequently. So for example, opioids, which are things that you'll find in things like Percocet that your dentist might give you, these make some people nauseous and they make other people high. So this is because they have two different types of receptors that they've inherited from their parents. So this is the type of example of where you have a different response to the same drug and will predispose somebody who has that type of high response to the opioid to becoming an addict potentially. So this is the final reason why tonight we're suggesting that this is potentially a brain disease. So I hope with these facts about brain circuitry and genetics that I've convinced you that addiction is a disease of the brain. And therefore, when you see someone struggling with this, I hope you'll consider that they may not have had much choice about the things that are happening in their lives, and perhaps you can help them on their way to recovery. Thank you for your